Dozens of people are killed in twin bombings outside Kabul airport, just as foreign leaders had been warning of an imminent threat by ISIL-K. Could Afghanistan face more attacks, and is the Taliban up to the security challenges? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Sika. More than 100 people killed, including at least 13 U.S. military personnel. Many more were also wounded by twin bombings outside Kabul's airport. The attacks claimed by an ISIL offshoot came as little surprise to many who had been warning of a security threat in the area for days. Despite that, thousands of people still gathered outside the airport waiting for their evacuations to be processed. The attacks happened close to the Abbey Gate entrance of Kabul airport and near the Baron Hotel, and just a few days before the August 31st deadline for a complete U.S. military withdrawal from the country. U.S. President Joe Biden has resisted calls to extend that date until all Americans and Afghans that are listed are flown out. The president has vowed to strike back at the attackers.
To those who carried out this attack, as well as anyone who wishes America harm, know this: we will not forgive. We will not forget. We will hunt you down and make you pay. I will defend our interests and our people with every measure at my command.
The head of the U.S. Central Command said it is coordinating with the Taliban to secure the airport. The Taliban condemned the attacks and said it is not responsible for the security failure.
There's this attack, but then there's also the situation around the airport. The gatherings of tens of thousands of people around Kabul airport is a suitable location for these attackers. This is in fact a security mishandling, a big error from their part and a big mistake. We've warned the foreign forces several times of the repercussions of large gathering around the airport.
Our correspondent Charles Stratford has more now from Kabul.
There are growing questions being asked about the Taliban's ability to deal with what analysts say is an increasing threat from ISIL in Afghanistan, a threat that has been made worse because during the Taliban's offensive towards Kabul, they went into prisons, opened the doors in order to be able to free Talib fighters. But in that process, so some analysts say, thousands of ISIL fighters were also freed. The situation has been made worse because of the amount of weapons now available to groups like this, weapons that fell into the hands of the Taliban that were commandeered from the ANA, the Afghan National Army, and US and NATO forces. But some experts saying a lot of these weapons have also fallen into the hands of ISIL. Now, the Pentagon has said that there has been cooperation between US and NATO forces and the Taliban during this evacuation operation. And the Taliban has said that it will not allow either homegrown or foreign terror organizations to use this country as a base to attack foreign countries or, of course, targets inside Afghanistan. But there are questions being asked as to whether that level of cooperation between the US and the Taliban that we've seen during this evacuation operation will continue once NATO forces leave. But one thing is for sure, that it is in both the US, NATO countries and the Taliban's interest to prevent an organization that not only presents a threat to this country, but the world. Charles Stratford for Inside Story, Kabul.
So what do we know about ISIL Khorasan, also known as ISIL-K, that's claimed responsibility for the attacks? Well, the armed group was formed in 2014 by breakaway fighters of the Pakistani Taliban and fighters from Afghanistan who pledged allegiance to the late ISIL leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. The name Khorasan refers to a historical region that included parts that would today be in Iran, Afghanistan and Turkmenistan. ISIL-K has been responsible for some of the worst attacks in Afghanistan and Pakistan in recent years, targeting girls' schools, hospitals, and a maternity ward. It is considered the most extreme and violent of all the militant groups in Afghanistan. It has major differences with the Taliban, accusing it of abandoning armed struggle in favor of negotiated peace deals with Washington. Well, let's bring in our guest now from Kabul. We have Obaidullah Bahir, a political analyst and a lecturer of transitional justice at the American University of Afghanistan. And from Pittsburgh, Colin Clark, Director of Policy and Research at the Sufan Group, a non-partisan strategy center dedicated to global security issues. And from Doha, Sultan Barakat, Director of the Center for Conflict and Humanitarian Studies at the Doha Institute. Thank you all for joining us. Obaidullah, let me start with you. Obviously, a horrible situation in Afghanistan right now with the aftermath of this attack, and lots of worries about what's going to happen next, and security, not just around the airport, but throughout Kabul and the country as a whole.
Yeah, what happened yesterday was a shock to all of us. The shock was that everyone was talking about it. There were reports, there were intelligence reports indicating something like that could happen. It was a very soft target, and it still happened. The little glimmer of hope that the youth in Afghanistan had, the educated youth, was that despite everything that we had traded in, the least we could have returned was peace, that the war was over, that the scale of the killing that used to happen every day in Afghanistan wasn't going to be seen anymore.
Let's turn to Colin Clark in Pittsburgh. Could an attack like this happen again?
Yeah, it could happen again, and that's what everybody's concerned about. I think tensions are high right now. The intelligence bells were ringing, and they were right. The administration said an attack was imminent, and we saw one. We know that ISK has the capability. We know that they have the intent, and they're very likely planning the next round of attacks. This could be the beginning of a sustained terrorist campaign by ISK in Afghanistan.
Sultan Barakat, is this a glimpse of more chaos to come?
It's actually a reminder to the Taliban that now that they've walked into Kabul and assumed responsibility, there is no way to secure the city without working with everyone else within the city. The city of 6 million people is largely unknown territory to them, and without a serious coalition with the leaders on the ground, I think we are likely to see more of this kind of incidents falling between the lines of a mandate and territorial security between the Taliban and the United States. And this is, I think, what happened. This whole area ended up almost under no one's control as the Taliban started to avoid the US forces. And now I think it's a very important reminder that they must get their act very quickly together, announce a government, extend their arm to the others, their hands to the others to join in running not just the city, but the whole country.
Colin Clark, how does this affect evacuation plans as they are right now? President Biden, as of now, is sticking to that August 31st date for all of the evacuations to end. But if an attack like this, if there is a real possibility of an attack like this occurring again, how do you get people into the airport? I mean, what about the logistics of this and the security challenges?
It's incredibly difficult, and I think that's what, since yesterday's attack, the military and the administration have been grappling with, trying to figure out a different way of security, a way to introduce some white space between the airport, the military, and the throngs of people that are descending on the airport. There's numerous vulnerable spots, soft targets, as we've seen, and we've got to figure out a way for the perimeter to be pushed back and for individuals to be processed and screened before they get right up to the gate. The current situation and the current alignment's not sustainable.
Obaidullah in Kabul, if I could turn back to you on this, and still talking about the security challenges here. We now have the kind of a curious situation now, something that wouldn't have been dreamt of just a couple of years ago, of the US government trying to make common cause with the Taliban, the insurgents that it fought 20 years ago against a shared enemy here in ISIL-K. What needs to be done to ensure security then for Afghans?
First off, we're hoping that the ISK's capacity or capabilities aren't as large as what it looked like yesterday. The Taliban, with their own history of being an insurgent group and creating such disruptions for the Republic before them, should have some level of experience of how to deal or understand the protocols and procedures of such organizations. And that's politics. I mean, the Afghan people have accepted their new reality. Those who aren't leaving the country are accepting the new reality that the same Taliban who were once an enemy for 2 decades are now people who are running this country. And it's really important that there's an engagement and there's a process for getting into the airport. Your other guest mentioned the need for a humanitarian corridor or a buffer zone to make sure that everyone isn't standing at the gate. Yesterday's incident had everyone deflecting and pointing the responsibility at the other, even though it was a collective failure on everyone's part. There has to be a better administration of this. And that starts with creating a government, that starts with creating a central address for the Americans to negotiate and talk to. But we're really hoping that all sides can get their acts together before such incidents become more common.
Sultan Barakat, some who supported this withdrawal decision by President Biden will say that Thursday's attack was only possible because the U.S. troops were there in the first place, that they were such an easy target. But is that argument too easy, do you think?
I don't think the attack was targeting the U.S. forces only. The attack, seems to me, was orchestrated to increase the chaos in the country and, as such, even counter the legitimacy of the Taliban and of any coalition the Taliban may reach. So it's not just targeting the United States. And just if you allow me just to go back to the issue of the coordination, there has been careful coordination between the United States and the Taliban ever since the 29th of February 2020. First, to avoid contacting each other in terms of, on the ground, militarily. And also more recently, since the 15th of August, to avoid any clashes between their forces and the Taliban. So it's not a matter of lack of coordination in terms of avoiding each other. It is how would you physically stop people from moving to the airport? The way the evacuation plans have been announced, largely to please people back home in the United States and Britain and France and elsewhere, have given the wrong impression to people that the gates are open to anyone who was wanting to leave Afghanistan to come to the airport and be airlifted. And that has really placed incredible pressure on the airport and its parameters, and has put the Taliban in a very difficult position, I think. They're damned if they stop the people coming to the airport, and they're damned if they don't. And I think that situation should come to an end. And ideally, those countries should have had an evacuation plan long ago, planned, organized to withdraw their staff, their families, their associates, have them by name, telephone numbers, text messages, whatever. But all of that, unfortunately, was not in place. And it all could be because of the speed in which things have happened. And in fact, as you may know, the actual entry of the Taliban into Kabul was not planned for, certainly not by the Taliban or the others. The plan was for them to stop on the outskirts of Kabul, and for President Ghani to continue with the military and the police to secure the city while the Americans take over the airport. But that plan was preempted by the early departure of the president, which was a surprise to everyone. And then Karzai and other leaders calling on the Taliban to secure the city so that there is no chaos and there is no looting going on in the city. So they're in one way or the other, the hand was forced to enter, and they were not prepared. The other side was not prepared, and we saw this chaos. But now, with every day that passes, there is a real pressure that they must get their act together.
Colin Clark, I know that public opinion in the US before this month was pretty much against or rather in favor of this withdrawal and not wanting to be in Afghanistan for much longer. But has that changed now because of this attack, or does it, for some people, does it actually bolster the argument that the U.S. needs to get out?
I think it's the latter. I think for many Americans, it's going to be proof that the United States has no place in Afghanistan and should be leaving. I do look at the polling data. I've been against the withdrawal from day one. And I think we also, as the other guests have acknowledged, have to recognize that this evacuation has been poorly planned. I know the administration is trying to put out positive news about how many people have been evacuated from the country, and that's great. But there's been a lot of haphazard nature of this evacuation and withdrawal essentially led in a direct line to what we saw yesterday. We lost 13 troops yesterday. This was a terrible day in the United States. Afghanistan lost many citizens that were killed and wounded, innocent civilians, including children. It's heartbreaking to watch this, and I think you're right. There's immense pressure for the administration to get this right. They were caught off guard on a number of different scenarios. There's got to be contingency planning. You've got to anticipate every possible scenario in a case like this. When you're doing a non-combatant evacuation operation, this should be war gamed out. We should have plans for every single possible scenario, and it's clear that we didn't.
Obaidullah, where does the Taliban go from here? Not just in terms of providing security, adequate security, but just the day-to-day governing of Kabul, because we know that quite a lot, thousands of Afghans have left already. Many of them skilled people who are part of the previous government. Is there a sense that they're actually, many of them are actually needed to help the Taliban govern the country?
Before I move on to your question, just a quick comment on,
Sure.
First off, I'd like to thank Collins, your guest, for recognizing that there were Afghans who gave their lives up yesterday because apparently President Biden didn't notice. And your guest, Barakat, could very well be a speaker for the movement itself. He talks about the coordination agreements between the Taliban and the U.S. He really needs to go outside the airport of Afghanistan to see the impeccable nature of that coordination. These people don't speak the same language. There is no middle people, and it's all extremely haphazard. That being said, with regards to where the Taliban go from here, if the brain drain is a real concern for the Taliban movement, they really have to come up with trust-building measures with the Afghan people. The Afghan ministries, even though not functional majorly yet, have departments for engineers that have 2 remaining out of 20 engineers. This is not going to be a functional, sustainable system if it stays this way. So either the Taliban convince the people that are, and not through coercion, obviously, they cannot hold educated populations hostage, but they need to convince them by establishing a government inclusive one as soon as possible, rolling out policies that ensure people's safety, matching their words with their actions with regard to the amnesty provided to or promised to people who would work with the government. And then in the long term, actually try to get these people back because, again, most of the people that were on these planes were educated people that the country, they themselves had invested years on themselves. And now they're not here. So the Taliban really need to address that gap because governing is not an easy job. They are good at fighting. We'll have to see if they can govern successfully or not.
Sultan Barakat, if we talk a little bit more about ISIL-K now and what their objectives were in this attack. Clearly, in the short term, it was meant to sow chaos and bring a sense of a lack of security, instability. But what's their ultimate goal? Are they looking for some sort of power, the same way that they were trying to build this, that the ISIL in Iraq and Syria was trying to build this caliphate? What is their ultimate aim?
First, if you allow me just to come back to my colleague about being a spokesperson to the movement, I will just turn a blind eye to this comment because I understand the pressure people are going under in Kabul at the moment. But it is important to recognize that the rational thinking in Kabul, unfortunately, has been missing for some time. And this is why people find themselves in this chaos at the moment. The talks in Doha were going on, then they got interrupted. And then as the Taliban were making progress towards the capital, it became clear to everyone, particularly I think around the August 12th, that the balance of power has shifted towards the Taliban. And the representatives of the president were talking to the Taliban about transfer, peaceful and orderly transfer of power. And that agreement was almost finalized. It was agreed by Ghani, and he left the country on the day when his delegation was going to leave to Doha to agree it with the Taliban. So I don't know what of that is known in Kabul or not, but this is the reality of the situation that is happening. Going back to ISK, it's very little is known about their actual agenda in Afghanistan. As you know, these are people that were flushed out mostly from Iraq and ended up in Afghanistan, and they started their activities after they were finished off in Iraq. They have been traditional enemies of the Taliban, and they're thriving on attracting the most extreme element and the least educated and within certain ethnicity of the Taliban ranks. And they are trying to present themselves as the ultimate extreme interpretation of Islamic movement, political movement. There's no political movement jihad, really. And this is how they've grown over the last couple of years. So it's not very clear whether they have any long-term political objective, but to disturb the potential stability. They're traditional enemies of the Taliban, they're traditional enemies of the Americans, and there were some, at the time, some rumors about them being associated by other regional powers, to some intelligence services and so on. But in general, I think they're going to be, they are known as bad news to the country. They are, as my colleague said, in small numbers, but they can be deadly. And the bombing that happened, which actually consumed the lives of more than 100 Afghans yesterday, is one example of what they're capable of doing. And I agree that the sooner the Taliban come up with an inclusive government, and in my opinion, the sooner they call back the police into ranks, the better. Better for the.
Colin Clark, I know you said earlier that you were not in favor of this decision to withdraw from Afghanistan in the first place, but are there really any palatable options for the U.S. at this point? Because if they decide to stay longer, wouldn't that be inviting further deadly attacks by ISIL-K?
I mean, at this point, as of today, in late August, no, there's no option for staying. We've already set this process in motion, and the president's made a decision, and he's going to stick to that decision. The question now becomes, given the decision he's made, how do we put together some kind of viable counterterrorism approach? He's used the term over the horizon. I've written in Politico about an offshore counterterrorism strategy with my colleague Asfan Yarmir. It's going to be difficult. We're going to be doing the same things we've been doing, except from a distance, and we'll be subject to the politics of the state wherever we set up our CT presence, whether that's in Pakistan, whether that's in a Central Asian country, and we're at the behest of somewhat mercurial leaders in government. So no good options all around. And if you look at what the United States has gotten wrong so far, even just in the last couple of weeks, it doesn't inspire much confidence that we'll be able to glean accurate intelligence if groups like ISK are growing and evolving, if groups like Al-Qaeda are attempting to reconstitute an external operations attack network. We won't know about that because we have no eyes and ears on the ground anymore.
Good to speak with all three of you. We're going to have to leave it there. Abdullah Bahir, Colin Clark, and Sultan Barakat. Thanks very much for being on Inside Story. And thank you, as always, for watching. Remember, you can see this program again anytime. Just go to our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, there's our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/Al AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. For me, Hazem Seeker, and the whole team here, bye for now.